Hayden Byer, they is a licensed clinical social worker and transmasculine advocate with over a decade of lived experience. He specializes in supporting transgender and gender-expansive youth through mental health care and community building. Hayden played a leading role in developing UNF's LGBTQ Center and founding Stonewall Hall, an affirming housing option for gender-diverse students. He now serves as Director of Mental Health Services at Jasmine, teaches social work at UNF, and sits on the board of Transisting Adolescents, which provides inclusive camping experiences for trans youth. Will you welcome Hayden Byer?
Thank you. So August is Transgender History Month. It was first legally recognized in 2021, just 4 years ago. This gives the impression that transgender folks are a relatively recent phenomenon, but as we know, this is not true. Transgender and gender diverse folks have been around for as long as people have been. There's evidence of transgender and gender diverse folks all throughout history. In one of the many roles I hold, I teach a course on social work with LGBTQIA+ populations at the University of North Florida. This course is a bit different than most social work electives because there's an entire history that none of my students have been taught before that I personally had to go out of my way to find, because history is so often written by those in power. Due to systemic oppression, colonization, and patriarchal norms often stemming from religions with an over-reliance on policing morality of others, transgender and gender-diverse stories have been systematically erased from our history. Our lives have been deemed unsuitable for a general audience and censored for decades, if not centuries. But our history is there if you look for it. It's buried under boulders beckoning freedom, leaf-littered labeled justice. The intent is, if you're not taught it by conventional methods, you won't move past the whitewashed, heteronormative, cisnormative textbook and seek it out yourself. The Compton Cafeteria riot happened in August of 1966, with the exact date lost to history, because those in power did not want a record of this amazing act of resistance by mostly trans women and drag queens. Queer history and queer rights are often thought to have started in June of 1969 with the Stonewall riots, but our history is as ancient as humans themselves. A big takeaway from this course that I hope my students understand is that attacks on transgender and gender diverse individuals inevitably lead to worse outcomes for everyone in society. This past spring semester, I tried to highlight this with my students during the start of the second Trump administration and the beginning of the Florida legislative session. I canceled class one night with the following note. In the interest of full transparency, I'm frustrated and full of rage. Currently due to the state of LGBTQ rights in our country and our country in general. As someone who has been doing LGBTQ+ nonprofit work for 13 years now, it has gotten significantly harder over the past several weeks, and I'm not in the headspace currently to coherently present a class on LGBTQ+ rights and history, especially for the topic this week of post-World War II perspectives, as we are watching history repeat itself in real time. I know you're all busy students, but as current or future social workers, it is our job to disrupt the unjust systems we encounter. So I'm taking the time tonight to disrupt the system at academia that insists upon its own importance above all else, and instead, resting. Rest is resistance. In times such as this, when we are inundated with messages everywhere that we need to consume, we need to monetize every hobby, we need to be constantly go, 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 taking the time to rest and center ourselves is an act of resistance that those in power do not want us to take. As a social worker by training, an educator by heart, a therapist by trade, an advocate, a public speaker, an expert in my field, a queer transmasculine person by the grace of whatever higher powers out there, a suicide survivor at 31 years old, I'm tired. The previous list is but a fraction of the work that I have done fighting for justice for queer and trans folks. I've attended numerous marches on Tallahassee. I've rallied for gay marriage, for Palestinian freedom, for access to gender-affirming care for all, for the Human Rights Ordinance in Jacksonville, and so many other things that I'm sure I'm forgetting, but it all boils down to our individual rights. I was always taught that my rights end where another person's rights start. I do not remember the first lesson I had on this topic, but it has shaped how I fight for justice in a very unjust society. See, a lot of folks think that transgender and gender diverse folks are asking for special rights, for things they do not deserve, or for things that they might regret. Rights for one group cannot be considered special when those same rights and dignities, like bodily autonomy or the right to make decisions that risk regret, are often taken for granted and largely ignored by another group. We have been fed lies about how gender-affirming care is harmful, experimental, and new. The same care and prescriptions to affirm a cisgender person's gender is considered just healthcare. About how gender-inclusive restrooms, locker rooms, and sports teams are harmful to women and girls. Those same spaces are statistically more likely to harm transgender people. How transgender teens are being catered to with litter boxes in their schools as though they're subhuman. Gender-affirming care is life-saving care, and it has existed for as long as people have. Gender-affirming care is also not just medical interventions and like medications and surgery. It's calling someone by the name that they choose, by the pronouns that they need. The same things that cisgender people take for granted every day. Gender-affirming care absolutely saved my life. When I first started at UNF, my sister dragged me to the LGBTQ center there, and I used to like to say I walked in and never left. But unfortunately, I had to leave after 10 years as the Florida government shut down all such centers. An act of injustice that current college students, faculty, and staff in Florida are feeling, and one that has driven many people out of our state entirely. The LGBTQ+ Center at UNF saved my life. It was a respite from the overwhelming heteronormativity of society and a place where I could be myself. The LGBTQ Center at UNF saved my life more than once, and it broke me to leave the sinking ship. The first time I was involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital, I was 18 years old. I just finished my first year at UNF, and I thought I was doing just fine. I'd made friends, I was very involved in events on campus and in my community. And over the next 2 years, I was in and out of psychiatric hospital stays 6 separate times to suicidal ideation or attempts. One of the last times I was hospitalized, I remember having overdosed on my anti-anxiety medication the night before. My sister came to get me from my dorm room to take me to the psychiatrist appointment that I had that day, and sitting in front of the psychiatrist, the one that was assigned to me the first time I was hospitalized, things were fuzzy and out of focus, but I very clearly remember the psychiatrist looking at my sister and saying, "She needs to go to the ER now," and sending me on my way. I don't remember much about the next few days and the come down from my overdose, but I do remember my determination that I was not going back to that psychiatrist. See, I'd come out to him several times before. I did not want him to call me by my birth name. I did not want him to call me she, and had made a note of this several times to him. Yet in a moment of vulnerability, when I was actively overdosing and in crisis, he didn't even bother to call me by my name or the pronouns that I requested. I was denied my right to be me while in crisis. This is what I mean by gender-affirming care is life-saving. After that hospitalization, I refused to go back to the psychiatrist. I switched to someone who wouldn't dead name me and who used the pronouns I wanted. I was hospitalized one more time after that, and after being treated as a person, giving a room to myself, allowed to be called the name and pronouns I wished, I was determined to live despite those who had hindered my journey. With that, I bring you to justice for trans folks. There is a view of justice that it's pretty, it's nice, but justice is gritty. It's bare-knuckled, it's in the trenches, and it is dirty. Justice in practice tends to be thought of as punitive, as something that is imposed upon a community that has been harmed. This is especially true when thinking about how we call our carceral system here in the US the justice system, with judges and magistrates sometimes being referred to as justices. But that's not the justice in which I speak when talking about trans justice. Justice is my sister punching a coworker of ours in the stomach after he called me it when I first came out. Justice is sharing DIY HRT guides and creating sacred spaces for trans folks to be themselves in. Justice is fighting tooth and nail to exist in spaces where transgender people have always been. For me, trans justice is allowing trans and gender diverse folks to be unremarkable. Since the day I came out at 20 years old, I have been looked at as a trans elder, as an information source for those seeking knowledge and understanding. I have taken this in stride and made a career out of it because I want other 20-year-old trans folks who are in their self-discovery journey to not have to bear the burdens that I did. Growing up, I was described as quiet and shy. Through the beginning of my social and medical transition, that quiet shyness needed to disappear because no one else was speaking up for me and what I needed. I was forced to find my voice and speak up for what I need, seek out resources that even to this day are hidden away due to fear-mongering by bigots. I learned through trial by fire about how resilient I can be when faced with improbable odds. Somebody you know and love is trans. Be that voice for them. The work I have done and continue to do for LGBTQIA+ nonprofits has thrown me into some fairly sticky situations. I've lost count of the number of death threats that I have received to the various LGBTQIA+ nonprofit emails that I check, and have even gotten some sent to my home. While at the LGBTQ Center at UNF, we once received a threat on a social media post that a pride parade we were planning to march through campus looked like a good shooting range. I don't say this for sympathy or for pats on the head. I say this because this is the everyday reality of living while trans, and it is not just. So how do trans rights pave the way for others? Sports only became segregated by sex because women were consistently beating men at their own games. The first recognized book burning of the Nazi regime was of the Magnus Hirschfeld Institute of Sexology, where decades of research and literature on transgender and gender diverse individuals was burnt to ashes and forgotten. The equity, justice, and rights of transgender and gender diverse folks are pleading for goes so far beyond trans rights. The fight for legal recognition of our genders is a fight against the suffocating weight of gender roles and expectations that stifles everyone from thriving. The fight against gatekeeping medical transition is the fight against barriers and unnecessary cost of everyone's health care. The fight for gender-affirming care is the fight for everyone's right to bodily autonomy. Because in the land of the free, nothing is free. And if you don't own the rights to your own body, then what do you own? Wherever you find history about people, you'll find history about transgender and gender diverse people, with trans rights paving the way for others. My history is unique to me, but my history is often resonate with a common history for today's trans people. We have been fighting since the beginning of human existence, and we are tired. My ask of you today is to help make a world where I can rest. For trans rights, we have fought for everyone. For trans rights, as we have fought for everyone else's. Seek out our history, as it's been banished from the bookshelves of Florida learning institutions. Care about trans people, as we have cared about you from the very beginning. Care about trans rights, because someone you love is trans, and you both deserve a future.